friends, welcome back to Food Prep Guide. Today's video is going to be for those of you who may be brand new to the idea of food storage, or maybe you're not brand new but you're ready to take it to the next level and kind of bulk it up from what you have to maybe a 3-month supply or 6-month supply or even a 1-year supply. I was thinking about this the other day about how to get started, and I know that there's a lot of overwhelm that comes into knowing where to start, but not just that, but knowing the ins and outs. It just feels like there's a lot to learn, a lot to research, and I want to help you with that today. I was thinking the other day about what I would do if I had to completely start over. What if I was brand new to this and I had to just start from the ground up? What would I do? And as I sat down and thought about what I would do, I realized that I was creating a list of things that I would do differently if I had to go back and do it all over again. So that's what we're going to address today. I've got 5 things that I would do differently if I was starting from scratch today. Let's get started.
By the way, if you would like help building your food storage, scroll down to the description box of this video and click this link for our free 1-year food storage plan. We calculated a year's supply of food for one person, then broke that data down into a week-by-week list of items to build your pantry on a budget. We'll send it straight to your inbox. If you're new here, we invite you to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss all of our upcoming food preservation, pantry storage, and gardening tutorials. Now back to the kitchen.
Okay, number 1, if I had to start over, I wouldn't start with the food. That might sound a little strange, and that's what I did. I started with the food. I think a lot of people start there, where they just jump into the research and say, okay, what's foods store well long term? Okay, rice, beans, flour, lentils. I need to start gathering that. And that's what I did. I just started gathering foods in larger quantities than I was used to, and I would, store it as best I knew how, and that was how I started. What happened with that is food wasn't getting used. Some food went bad because I didn't know how to store it properly, but mostly because it got pushed into the back of like the pantry or the closet or under the bed and forgotten about. I wasn't using the food because I didn't have a plan for using the food. I didn't know how I was going to use all those rice and beans into delicious meals and not just gross plain rice and beans. So what I would do if I had to start over is I wouldn't start with the food just yet. I would start with what my family eats. I would go through and make a list of our family's favorite meals, and I would start picking out the shelf-stable ingredients from those meals. So if your family likes to eat tacos, we eat tacos all the time. So I would pick out the pinto beans and the rice and the dehydrated onions and the salsa, because salsa can be canned and stored for years. And I would start picking out ingredients like that. And the next step I would do is identify the items that are not shelf stable and see if I can make them shelf stable via canning, dehydrating, or just buying freeze-dried foods to replace that ingredient in that meal. Or I would be planting my garden and I would plan on like cilantro. Cilantro doesn't really store very well long term. It didn't taste good. I don't think it tastes very great freeze-dried. Some people love it, but that is something that's like, if we want cilantro or pico de gallo in our tacos, I'm gonna have to grow cilantro and just have it fresh. So that's where I would start, is a list of your family's favorite meals and just start reverse engineering them. Get your list of staples look for those items that repeat multiple times. So if you have 10 meals and 5 of those meals use pasta or rice or dehydrated vegetables or just vegetables, and then you can make them shelf stable by dehydrating them, focus on those things that are used most often across your family's favorite recipes, and then start going out and stocking up on those things and learning how to store those things and that kind of thing. And that will help protect against food getting wasted, food getting forgotten about, but it will also allow you to go into this food storage transition with a plan, which I think is so important for making good use of your investment. Okay, number 2, and this is a big one. If I were completely starting over from the very beginning, I would make my storage space with inventory in mind and with rotation in mind. This was such a pain point for me, and it's not something that I expected because I just didn't know. You don't know what you don't know. And I really didn't know about this, but when you start gathering bulk food items and it just kind of starts piling up, if you don't have kind of idea of how you're going to take inventory in the future or how you are going to rotate through those foods, what happens is the food items get lost. The old food gets used last, like you're accidentally pulling from the new food while the old food is in the back, wasting away. But also when you go to do an inventory, like you can't see how much food you're moving through or those supplies dwindling, and therefore know when you need to restock, when you need to refill it. And if you don't have a way to kind of keep track of all that, it can, what is supposed to be giving you peace of mind, can turn into something very stressful and very frustrating. And that's kind of what happened to me. And I was about 2 years into it before I put my foot down. I was like, okay, I'm not doing anything else. I'm not buying anything else. I'm not doing any more, planning or meal planning or whatever until I get this issue fixed. And I basically did a whole house inventory and figured out storage solutions that would allow me to visually see gaps in my inventory, but also rotate through very seamlessly to where it wasn't this something that I wanted to avoid in my day-to-day or weekly chore list. I just didn't want to be rotating through it because it was a pain point and it was just took way longer than it should. So that's from the very beginning, I would go ahead and save yourself the trouble of that, save yourself the stress of not being able to find what you need when you need it, accidentally buying more than you need because you totally forgot about that bucket that was in that other room, and completely running out of things because you thought you had more than you did and you weren't able to watch those supply level dwindle down to buy more in time before running out. So just a few tips for how to go about doing that. The number one thing I would suggest is to store like with like. If you, ideally, if you had one space in your house where you could store everything, like say you have a spare bedroom and you can convert it into a pantry, fantastic. That's ideal. I don't have that, and I think a lot of people don't have that. I have a small space. I don't have any extra bedrooms. I don't even have any extra closets. So in my laundry room, which is where we were storing a bunch of stuff, is like the skinny. You can barely walk through there normally. You kind of have to scoot. And so I had to get creative. And if that's you, if you need to get creative, what you can do is break up your storage areas into different areas, but still store like with like. So have all of your canned soups in one area. Have your 5-gallon buckets of your baking supplies in one area. Have your canned foods in one area. Have your dehydrated vegetables, fruits, starches, everything in one area. You know what I mean? Like kind of keep it categorized. And that way, when you are doing your inventory, you can even set up your inventory page with those labels of the different areas and just be able, and that when you're looking for dehydrated peas, you can go straight to that one area and find them very quick. And you can also, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me move on to the second point. I was about to say you can see the supplies dwindling, but we need to do something else. So the other side of that is being able to take inventory easily. And that is, so picture a cabinet. Picture a shelf or a cabinet, and when you are loading, it's very hard to load things into the back and pull from the front, which that's what we want to do. We want the oldest stuff to be constantly moving to the front and putting the old stuff in the back. But when you're working with a shelf or a cabinet that is mounted to a wall or up against a wall, especially if you have young kids and it's being anchored to the wall, so you literally can't get behind it, how are you going to constantly be putting stuff in the back? And that was one of the things that was annoying to me. It's like, okay, it's time to restock canned tomatoes. But I would put that off because restocking the canned tomatoes means I had to take all the tomatoes off the shelf and then, do my shopping, whatever, put all that back on, and then put the old stuff back in front. Not a big deal, but just not super efficient. And I'm like really big on efficiency. So what I did was I moved to a right-hand side, left-hand side form of inventory, or form of rotating my foods, I should say. So let's say you have a cabinet, and on the right-hand side, well, let's say you have a whole shelf dedicated to canned corn. instead of doing new in the back and old in front, you would constantly load your new into the left side and constantly pull the old from the right side. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm rambling. I hope that makes sense. But it's just, instead of front to back, you're doing left to right. And though one of the only, I think there might be other ways. There probably are other ways. But in my mind, it's like the only way to make that successful is if you can dedicate each shelf to one thing or one group of things. Like you have a shelf for all of your canned tomatoes. You have a shelf dedicated to your dehydrated foods, so that you can load into the left and pull from the right. I hope that was helpful to you, and I hope I didn't ramble too bad. Okay, number 3, I have this written down. Oh yeah, okay. Number 3, I would get a mason jar sealer system a whole lot earlier on than I did. I was a couple years into my journey before I ever even knew that vacuum sealing mason jars were a thing. Didn't even know. And I definitely didn't know about this brake bleeder pump. So this brake bleeder pump, if y'all are friends of Food Prep Guide and you've been here a while, I'm sorry, I probably sound like a broken record, but just in case there's any of new viewers, you're just gonna set this pump hole right into the hole of this attachment. This plops down onto your mason jar, and then you just pump this, and you go until that needle stops. That needle's gonna, as you pump, that needle's gonna move up, and when it gets to where it's not really moving anymore, you have a vacuum seal. And that was another kind of issue for me, was I was going through so much plastic. Number one, I don't like using a ton of plastic. I have switched to glass for almost everything, so it was bugging me to have to be using so much plastic for those. I'm talking about those plastic rolls in the Food Saver, like vacuum sealer machines. And that's how I stored things. That's how I got a vacuum seal early on, was I would pour like my flour and my rice and my beans and my lentils and my split peas, and I would pour those into those plastic bags, hook it up to my Food Saver vacuum sealer, suck the air out, put it in storage, which is great. That's a perfectly fine option. But I didn't like using all of that plastic, and I was spending kind of a lot of money on that plastic. It was like I was going through those big rolls, every month or two, and I was just constantly having to purchase more. And I didn't also, because I live in a small house, I can't have my vacuum sealer just like out on the counter. And it's pretty big, pretty heavy, and so I have to go into my storage area, get the vacuum sealer box out, unload it, hook it up, get it all working, do my stuff, package it up, move it back to storage unit, so it's not like a easy in and out type thing. With this just slides into my drawer right here. So do the mason jar tops. And it is just, 3-5 minutes, boom, I'm done. And when I'm able to vacuum seal it in mason jars. Another benefit of that, when I was vacuum sealing in plastic bags, you can't just store those vacuum seal bags out, on a counter or in a closet. Like, they need to go into some kind of container, a Rubbermaid box, a 5-gallon bucket, something like that. But those things block your view of your supplies. And for me, out of sight, out of mind. So when I put those things in storage, I may as well have just thrown it away, or have never bought it in the first place, to be completely honest with you, because I would just forget about it. So switching to the mason jar storage, because mason jars are clear, I can see the supplies dwindling. And when I switched to mason jar storage, I switched away from storing things in Rubbermaid containers in obscure places, and I carved out spaces, whether it was transforming a closet or getting one of those 2-door standalone cabinets into my kitchen or into my laundry room, and allowing those mason jars to be front and center in easily accessible locations, so that I was always seeing it and remembering it and cooking with it, most importantly, working it into my meal plan and not letting it just get pushed away and forgotten about. So if that's possible for you, I highly recommend getting a mason jar sealer, and at least maybe not completely switching over to that method. So we typically will have 5-gallon bucket storage and mason jar storage. We have pretty much eliminated plastic vacuum seal bags. I do have a few left over from when I did do it that way, but it's pretty much 5-gallon buckets and mason jars. and it has done a world of good for making it easy for me to rotate through and to keep inventory because I can see the supplies as they are dwindling and restock appropriately. Okay, number 4. From the very beginning of food storage, I would think about sick days. This is something that I did not think about early on, and here's why that was an issue. So you can absolutely stock up on convenience foods in your food storage, and I do recommend having a few on hand for this particular reason. But for budget reasons and for space reasons, we only stock in bulk, typically one ingredient foods or single ingredient foods. So your lentils and your rice and your beans and your flour and your baking ingredients. The problem with that is when you're sick, you don't feel like cooking, right? You don't feel like cooking anything, but you certainly don't feel like cooking from scratch, which takes more time than a convenience food item. And especially if you have a family, especially with children, it's like it doesn't matter how sick you are, you've got to eat, right? And your children still need to eat. And so if you are the primary cook in your family and you get sick, you know, what is everybody else going to be eating besides like PB&Js? You know, do you have something in your food storage that your family can eat that still has some nutritional value and that can be pulled together quickly without you, the sick person, having to get up and do it yourself? And this is something that I did not think about early on. And we had a time when I was very sick, and my husband did a fantastic job of cooking, but the problem was we ran out of the kind of easy to cook type meals pretty quickly, like within a few days, because we don't stock convenient foods in bulk. And it started to be kind of an issue after about day 4, day 5 of sickness, of just feeding our family. So from the very beginning, I would work into my food storage plan sick meals, which for me, it has become soups. That is just something that I know can still have some nutritional value with a lot of vegetables, with some good protein, and we can keep it pretty clean without a bunch of those nasty ingredients that are kind of inherent in processed foods. But soups has been the answer for me. So I will either buy it from the store. We've been canning up Brunswick stew like crazy because everybody loves it. But whether you can it yourself or whether you buy it from the store, I would consider something quick and easy that will store for many, many years, where you don't have to worry so much about the shelf life, so that you can have something to turn to when someone in your family is sick, especially if you are sick and you are the primary cook for your family. Okay, number 5, last but not least, lentils. I would not overestimate the value of lentils in my food storage, which I did early on. In fact, I believe I was probably 3 years into my journey before I even tasted my first lentil. I didn't even know, I had never tasted lentils before. I had heard about lentils, but I didn't even really know what they were. I certainly didn't know how to cook with them. But after several years, lentils just kept popping up. It's like on those list of things that people recommend for long-term food storage, and I just always just kind of brushed it off. I don't even know what they are. Don't know how to cook with them. Not for me. But I came across a fantastic deal on lentils a couple years ago, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to use this as an opportunity to force myself to learn how to cook with lentils. And I did. I tested out all sorts of different recipes and, you know, tried out different things. And I found out that lentils it's like a meal stretcher. Like almost no matter what you're making, you can throw in some lentils and make it stretch that much further. And that's another point that I want to discuss. When you get to the point, we hope that, I'm rambling, but we hope that when we're building food storage, we kind of hope that we're not ever gonna really like need it in like an emergency type situation. We would rather let it be just a money saving type situation and not having to go to the grocery store as much, which is what we do. We're constantly working through it, but we hope we never have to only eat from food storage, right? Well, there was a time period in fairly recent history that we did only eat from food storage, and we tried to do it for 2 weeks. And I mean only. I mean absolutely no fresh fruit. We didn't even go to the grocery store to stock up for this test. It was just, we just did it, didn't have any fresh produce on hand. The only meat we had in the freezer was maybe like 1 or 2 chicken thighs and a pound of ground beef. So we were really only eating from food storage. And what I can tell you with 100% confidence is that food storage will not last as long as you think it does. And when you start having you or your entire family eating only from that food storage, it goes fast, like scary fast. So one thing that I learned from that experience was I need to stretch meals every single meal, not just work in, like right now, life is normal and we do a monthly meal plan and we will work in meat stretching meals, but also meal stretching meals, like making not necessarily the meat stretch, but making the entire meal stretch and making it overall cheaper to produce. We'll work in those meals on a regular basis just for budget reasons. But when you're in a type of situation where you're having to eat all of your meals from food storage, you'll need to make breakfast, lunch, supper, and snacks, all of it stretch. And one way that you can do that is with lentils. You can use lentils to stretch meatloaf. You can use lentils to stretch, of course, your soups and stews. I don't know if y'all heard that, but my text message just did a weird noise. But you can use it to stretch crock pot meals, and you can make bread, flatbread, not like a rising loaf, but an easy skillet flatbread, no yeast, just in your skillet, no oven. And you can make that flatbread out of lentils and water. Now you will want to season it with some things to make it taste better. And it's not our absolute favorite thing in the world, but we absolutely used it and enjoyed it enough to be able to make meals stretch. It fills you up, and it's just, I cannot overestimate the value of lentils in food storage. If you are someone who has digestive issues or maybe an autoimmune disease and you can't eat lectins, then you might want to learn how to sprout the lentils. Now, I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving you medical advice at all. Absolutely do your own research. I'm not saying that sprouting the lentils completely removes the lectins. I mean, it might, that's kind of questionable, but sprouting the lentils first can really make them so much more digestible and easier on your stomach if you're someone who has some stomach issues with lectin heavy foods, because lentils are pretty heavy in lectins. But did I say lectins or lentils? Yes. Lentils are heavy in lectins. That's a tongue twister. But yes, okay. I hope that was helpful to y'all. I think that was it. Yes, number 5, lentils. I hope that was helpful to y'all. I hope it gave you some ideas for starting with your food storage if you're brand new, or some ideas on how to bulk up and move up the ranks with your pantry if you're maybe wanting to expand it to 3 month, 6 month, or 1 year. Okay, y'all. We'll see you next time. Bye.